So there's a book that I heard about, and I actually went to the bookstore. They didn't have it. Um, they were like, "Oh, we could order it for you," and I was like, I have two books I haven't read yet, so I'll probably wait. But I really do want to read it. Um, I think it's probably really, really good, and I think it probably um, is trying to help. And but of course, me being the argumentative person that I am, the person that is not just taking one answer at face value, um, I thought to discuss the book that I haven't even read. And so, how can you discuss something that you haven't read? Pretty arrogant. And I realize that. But when I hear the title of the book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, um, but it's not to disagree, it's to say and to take it further. And maybe she did in her book, it's the emotional lives of us all. We're all emotional people. Um, and I think that teenagers and kids, they are great. They're truthful, and they actually can make great decisions. Um, I think that just like Frankel said, and actually the author of this book, who I've talked about, David Brooks. So, The Road to Character by David Brooks. He says exactly what Frankel says, just in a little bit of a different context. Frankel basically says that there's two races of people: decent people and indecent people. And Brooks says that on all levels of socioeconomic, religious, gender, everything, you're going to find schmucks. So he uses the word schmucks. Frankel did not. He used the term decent or indecent people. Um, and so the same thing happens with teens. There's going to be good teens. There's going to be not so good teens. There's going to be decent teens. There's going to be not so decent teens. There's going to be schmucks that are teens and non schmucks. But here's the beautiful thing about teenagers: teenagers can grow out of it. Teenagers can change. So even if they're not that great in their teenage years, they have a chance. But then, too, if they are great in their teenage years, they can change for the worse. They can be soured. They can be completely. Their hearts can be hardened by mature, role models that don't model right for them. So, there's always, that's where we get into that, back and forth, no answer. Um, but we really often don't try to see a teenager's point of view. We don't look back to our teen lives, to our insecurities, to our desire to look cool, um, to our desire to make stupid, irrational. We'll get to that decisions, um, feeling invincible. And obviously being risk takers, all that stuff. And I talked about sensation seeking, but we just don't have that empathy for the young people. Um, and then in turn, they don't see ours, and they don't see our lives as lives lived and experienced, right? So see that's where the disconnect often happens is that, like, I didn't just arrive at 45. Like, I don't say some of the things that I say um, just out of the blue, and but they have to experience those things. Sometimes I tell them, and I don't want them to experience them the way that I did, but because there are some times I wonder why I made it through. And I don't want you guys playing. I don't want teenagers playing that game of chance. That's just not what I want them doing. I know it's not always going to be lollipops and rainbows, but don't play the game of chance. I didn't know I was doing it when I was doing it, but I really was. I was playing chance with a lot of things. Um, and so, our life has all these different experiences. The loss that we've experienced, um, the successes, the everything, the birth, the miracle of birth, the many many different things, the sobriety, the um, you know the more clarity, um, you know the humbling moments in life, so much stuff. And kids don't understand that many of their parents and many of the adults in their lives have been through a lot, and grandparents. And I've always said that the grandmother's wisdom is the greatest. Oh, just have some milk and cookies, sit down, and we'll talk about it. And there's nothing really you're going to throw at a grandma she hasn't seen, for the most part. They've seen everything in their life. And from that, if we're not seeing the experience, like, we're looking at the rational decisions. You know, a lot of our decisions are not very rational, but we say that kids are irrational. You're being irrational. We're not looking at it, they're being very much rational in their point of view, in their station in life. It's very rational to want a certain pair of sneakers and to be accepted through maybe some materialistic things. We all did it. I had Birkenstocks. I can't remember. I wore certain jeans. Flannels were really big. Um, at different times. I don't even want to go back at some of the horrible decisions I made. Uh, with my wardrobe. I think there were overalls with one side down because I thought I was like Kid and Play or something. Brutal, but I thought it was cool back then. And I'm sure there were plenty of adults who were like, the kid looks like an idiot. Um, and so um, we have to accept that some of their things that they're making are very irrational to us, but it's fully rational with them. And some of the stuff that we do that's fully rational is so boring and mundane to them, you know, like, oh, it's very rational to not do this and not do that. But we look like oftentimes to the kids is just boring. And I think that brings that into when we think of kids as emotional. See, we're just as emotional often. Um, and excuse me, my phone. I didn't silent my phone. Um, but we're just as emotional. We just learn how to suppress it more. And we suppress a lot of emotions, and some adults suppress it through alcohol, through drugs, through not taking risks socially, or in relationships or anything like that. We learn through certain behaviors how to suppress our emotions. We don't cry as openly because it's a sign of weakness. um, we don't have certain things um, that we express, and we learn to kind of suppress our anger. um, and by suppressing our anger and our frustrations, that results in other ways. um, but there's something too, with suppression and suppressing emotions, that we have to teach kids how to suppress certain emotions, and how that's actually positive, and how not to suppress certain emotions, when and where, and in the stoic way of approaching each situation with the proper emotion and the proper reaction, which I think I've talked about before. But suppression sometimes can be like temperance. The word temperance, we're tempering our anger, because we should not be angry all the time. We should not be violent. We should not direct our anger towards others. So suppression of anger at certain times, teach them how to suppress their anger and control and self-restraint. But also teach them healthy outlets, how they can make sure that temperance doesn't become suppression, that is that built up anger inside that leads to massive releases of anger and emotion. So I think that that's a really large conversation of how do we learn how to suppress certain emotions in a positive way, but also how have we learned to suppress certain emotions negatively, and how can we utilize suppressions of positives in the word of the virtue of temperance and self-restraint and control. And how can we look at suppression in the negative of, we're never really addressing the issue. We're not really addressing how I felt when I spoke up in class and the teacher shot me down and kids laughed and I got really embarrassed, and I never wanted to talk in class again. um, I spoke in a work setting and people mocked me and laughed at me or whatever, and I never wanted to, or I had a lot of distrust and hatred in my coworker. How do we get beyond that? How do we work through that? So these are things that happen in our lives, and I think that we can look at some as temperance, and then the negative side we have to work on too, and get that. And I think that we have to speak openly with people we trust, that when we're embarrassed, we have to laugh it off sometimes. And, we have to, look at many, many different um, situations, that we're teaching kids to suppress their excitement, suppress their fear. And maybe their fear is irrational, maybe it's rational. Maybe their excitement's, uh, rational or irrational, and also their willingness to be open. Do we mock kids who are very open and honest and are talkative and sharing, and do kids in a social setting mock them? So I turn the page on that. I have written down a lot of stuff on this so I don't lose track, and I talk about what I think. Um, and um, I think what I'll close on is something that has to be very carefully taught and articulated. But oftentimes, the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. And I think for me, I can look at, or I didn't, just like Lane Staley said, you never understand who they thought I was supposed to be. I think there are people who thought I was supposed to be something, maybe more than what I was supposed to be, and maybe less than what I was supposed to be. Who knows? Maybe I had haters, and maybe I had people who were pumping my tires more than they should have. But putting alcohol and things like that behind me at 23, um, it was there was a lot of excess. There was a lot of excess leading up to 23. Um, and I was very lucky to be done with it and have it be behind me by the time I was 23. But that, in that regard, the road of excess was not just my own excess; it was the excess of others that I was witnessing. Family members and friends who were struggling with addiction, some people who got sober, some people who actually didn't make it, and so that excess um, truly led me to maybe not the palace of wisdom, maybe the cabin of wisdom. Nothing opulent here. Um, but that excess and my own experience and the experience of others really led me to um, a great deal of wisdom, and not immediate. It wasn't like at 23 light went off. 24, 25, nope. Things kept happening and changing, and I don't know that I was always better in my 30s. I'm sure I had a couple years in my 30s where I was really bad. I've been in a little bit of a lull lately. This winter, I've definitely been in a little bit of a Groundhog Day, which many of us had. Get up, and it's just like autopilot. It's repeat. Um, but I'm not too concerned about it. I've gotten done what I need to get done for the most part, and you just have to recognize some of those times that you're not always going to be on this progressive overload of perfection. It's going to be ups and downs, and we have to recognize our own emotional lives, how we have and we have not learned to deal with them, and what we're expecting kids to when they are massively hormonal. And, we're on a different hormonal way. Everything else is going this way, and everything for them is going this way. They're on this upward trajectory, energetic, vibrant, you know, things are happening, you know, goal setting, achieving. And, at 45, for me, you're starting to kind of go down and realize, like, hey, this is what you get. I'll give it a shot, but it's not going to be great. And we have to have empathy and understanding. And we also have to have them understand that in a mean, cruel world, also a world filled with beauty, you don't get to 45, 50, 60 um, by just kind of watching the world go by. There's a lot in your life that happens, and they have to be open to your experiences and your story, and they have to make their own story. But remember, if it's done right and it's taught right, the road of excess can lead to the palace of wisdom. And we have to teach these kids um, the best possible way to be in touch with their emotions and how to manage their emotions. And she could have said a million things way better than me. I can't wait to read her book. I think her last name's Demore. She's a PhD, Dr. Demore. She wrote The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, and I really hope to read it. And maybe after I read it, I will have to make many corrections on what I've said and rethink what I have thought. And that's the beauty of it. But if I brought some clarity to any of you, um, good. And if I get more than one view, um, yeah, maybe I'll just do like Michael Scott and just keep watching it myself. I'm up to 101 views. Anyway, enjoy your day.